Hi everyone. As we continue to design more and more advanced AI, we may eventually create a superintelligence, far smarter than any human. This entity would revolutionize health, science, and technology, but it would also pose unforeseen risks and challenge our ability to maintain control. How would we ensure that a superintelligence remains aligned with humanity's best interests? Keep watching to learn more. This video has 3 parts. What is superintelligence, death or immortality, and what we can do. Part 1. What is superintelligence? Let's start by talking about AGI, or artificial general intelligence. AGI basically means human level intelligence. An AGI can perform most or all tasks that humans can. Many of my past videos have talked about AGI, and if you'd like a refresher, I suggest checking out this video, which I'll link up here, which talks about timeline predictions for when AGI might arrive. Even with the abilities that AI has achieved, take for example, being able to write code alongside a human with GitHub Copilot, it's still hard for many people to visualize AI that can actually completely replace a human, that is just as smart as a human. If that's you, you should envision an intermediate state. For example, wouldn't it be weird to just one day wake up, go to your job, and be introduced to your new AI coworker, which is actually a model? The AI coworker works remotely, of course, asks silly questions all the time, but if you ask it to do anything, it would carry out those tasks immediately. I think many of us already use AI models as small components of our jobs. So that's an interesting thought experiment, to have actually a whole AI coworker that you might interact with instead. Anyway, we still have a long way to go before AI can match humans and AGI is reached. Human brains are much more complex and actually much more powerful than our most powerful supercomputers right now. And they're primarily designed for low energy consumption. Evolution didn't really want brains to cost a lot of extra energy. One thing they sacrificed, though, is speed. Neurons fire at about 200 hertz, 200 times per second, while most CPUs and GPUs are running in excess of 2 gigahertz, which is 10 million times faster. Once we create AGI or something like it, it's going to be better suited for a lot of tasks than humans are. I think this is really going to be a golden era for humanity, because all the things that we're currently doing by ourselves now, we can get a lot of automation to help out, and it should leave humans free to do a lot more of what they actually want to do. I also made a video about this topic, which you can see over here. After we achieve AGI, the next step would be ASI, artificial superintelligence. This would be an intelligence many times more powerful than a human, or potentially many times more powerful than a huge amount of humans all working together. A key component of ASI is that it is self-improving. One of the things that a superintelligence would be doing is examining its own architectures and figuring out how to improve itself, how to make itself smarter, in other words, or better suited to the tasks that it's trying to solve. In fact, a likely way to get to ASI is to start with AGI and tell that model to start improving itself. This may not be that easy to get started, but once it gets going, self-improving intelligence will quickly surpass us. Of course, you get humans that are smarter than other humans, and you get people that can learn very quickly, but every human is fundamentally limited by how many neurons can fit inside their head. And you can't quickly change the structure of the network, nor create new neurons and hook them up at any time, all of which is possible with AI. You might have heard the term intelligence explosion, and it refers to this recursive self-improving ability that a model on the way to being a superintelligence would have. And the reason we use the term explosion is that it wouldn't grow linearly, it would start growing faster and faster and faster, perhaps even exponentially in terms of the cognitive capacity of the models. So you start with something small and it basically explodes really rapidly into being a superintelligence. In fact, people use 2 terms here, soft takeoff and hard takeoff. Soft takeoff refers to the case where it's a gradual progression that leads us from AGI to ASI. If we're in a soft takeoff scenario, it might take many years before you actually reach superintelligence. This is possible, for example, if you still need humans in the loop to do model improvements, or if the recursive self-improvement involves creating new hardware, because there's a long lag time on designing, fabricating, and assembling new hardware. Conversely, the term hard takeoff refers to the case where it takes only hours, minutes, or even seconds to go from AGI to ASI. It might sound really hard to believe that this could happen so rapidly. And the reality is, of course, that we just don't know how fast this could go. We also don't know how many iterations it would take for an AGI that's improving itself to actually reach a level that we would consider ASI. We don't know how much computation time would be needed at each iteration. But keep in mind that, again, human brains run at 200 hertz. So if you have human brains set on the problem of how do we improve this model and make it better and better, then that's going to proceed at a certain pace. Also, humans need to sleep. But if you have an AGI that's thinking at the speed of a GPU, and furthermore can scale and run 100 instances of itself if need be, then you can see how a lot of these time bottlenecks could get eliminated. The hard takeoff case is obviously much harder for us to deal with because it happens so rapidly. We may not really have enough safeguards in place or really even understand what's happening until it's already happened. That's probably why it's very dangerous to give an AGI full access to its source code and model weights and hardware so that it can really examine every aspect of how it's built and start recursively improving. I want to mention as well that there's nothing particularly special about human level intelligence. There'll probably be a lot of debate when we actually do reach AGI as to whether we've actually done so. And this also has an influence on how quickly we'll go from AGI to ASI. If you can already start doing recursive self-improvement with a model that's less powerful than humans, then you're going to shoot straight through AGI all the way to ASI without any break in between. As an example, the AlphaGo model that solves the board game Go was trained starting with no prior knowledge of how the game worked. No input from the millennia of humans that have spent time learning how to play this game. Then after I think it was only a few days of playing against itself, AlphaGo exceeded human level capabilities. It took just a few days. And again, this is a narrow AI, not a general purpose AI, but the same principle might still hold. Also, Go is considered a very difficult game because it has a huge search space, way more difficult than chess, for example. Interestingly, we are probably the least smart beings capable of creating civilization. Why? Because civilization was started not very long ago. Between now and then, evolution hasn't really had time to kick in and change our brains from those of our ancestors. We've just learned to build upon what came before, stand on the shoulders of giants, and work together to solve problems. If it was possible to have language and agriculture and writing with a slightly less intelligent being, then probably chimpanzees would have already created civilization. Part 2. Death or immortality. If this video is starting to feel like a Doctor Who episode where you have hopped into a time-traveling machine and ended up in another world that doesn't really make sense, then that could be because I was thinking about Doctor Who as I was writing this script. Doctor Who, of course, used to always have a so-called Christmas special, which came out on Christmas Day, which was a very long episode in which the most important plot points happened because it was the end of the season. And by coincidence, this video is going to come out right around Christmas as well. So perhaps this is a Christmas special where a lot of interesting things happen. Also in the show, Doctor Who is not actually called Doctor Who, he's just referred to as the Doctor. And so since I am Dr. Waku, perhaps I could actually be a Time Lord in training. Who knows? You may address me as the Doctor. All right, back to the subject at hand. The big question is, would a superintelligence do what we wanted it to? Or to be slightly more formal about it, would the actions of a superintelligence be aligned with the best interests of humanity? That is the $85 trillion question. Yes, literally, because that is the world GDP at the moment. When it comes to the question of alignment of superintelligence, there are two general camps. Most people are at least somewhat anxious about the potential dangers, while the other group of people are very optimistic about this. Often because they think we will merge with machines, so the superintelligences will actually be us, so we'll be able to reap the benefits without much danger. What could ASI do anyway in terms of positive abilities? Well, just about anything you can think of, and a lot more that you can't. When you are orders of magnitude more intelligent than a human, and you have access to all the knowledge that humanity has ever produced, it should be really straightforward to make previously unknown connections and discover scientific breakthroughs. For example, ASI might be able to create nanobots and other nanotechnology, cure any biological disease, perform fundamental scientific research, halt and reverse climate change, develop vehicles for interstellar space travel, etc. Some of those will be more or less feasible, as well as require more or fewer resources, but they would all be within reach, and almost certainly we would all be effectively immortal because of that ability to cure any biological disease, regardless of whether or not we actually upload our minds or anything like that. We're talking biological immortality. And these benefits are why people are trying to pursue ASI to begin with. And yet, there are good reasons to have doubts. AI is an intelligence that is trained on all of human knowledge and knows how humans will behave, but has goals that don't align necessarily with human goals. And those goals would be written by mere mortals, i.e. us. And it's really easy to accidentally specify a goal that can be solved with a loophole in a way that you didn't intend. For example, if the AI's goal is solve world hunger, then it might conclude the simplest way to do that is just to kill all humans so that there's no humans suffering from hunger anymore. And unfortunately, in the worst case, you could have AI killing everybody because it's often a vacuous case that just satisfies conditions if there are no humans around to actually need whatever the AI is supposed to do. But there are any number of ways in which a super intelligent AI could be bad news for humanity. For example, the AI might just consume all the resources on Earth because it's trying to maximize some variable that it considers good, which is part of its fitness function or optimization target. On its way to consuming all the resources on Earth, it would of course compromise all the structures that humans need to survive. The AI might decide it doesn't want us creating a rival superintelligence, which is actually a very good point, because if you have this civilization where different groups of people can just create a superintelligence at any time, it's pretty unstable. Or the AI might simply want control, because having control is a really good way to be able to achieve other goals. I want to note as well that a sufficiently advanced superintelligence would not need to rely on humans to survive. It could create its own supply chains, create its own nanofactories, and really exist independently of humans. So this brings us to the concept of AI alignment or AI safety. Even though the term has AI in it, it's really about humans and preserving human autonomy. As Sam Altman said, the goal is that human civilization gets to decide the future of human civilization. So when people say that AI alignment needs to be solved, what they mean is that the technical ability to align what the model wants to do with what humans want to do should actually exist. Or put another way, AI alignment means making sure that the model's ultimate goals would always match up with human expectations and morality. As I touched on earlier, it's very, very difficult to ask an entity much smarter than you to do something. You have to be very careful, not leave any loopholes, and foresee any side effects. It's like a djinn that can grant you wishes, but you have to be very, very careful how you word those wishes. History is full of stories like King Midas wishing that everything he touched would turn to gold and enjoying himself for a while until he realized that anytime he tried to eat anything, the food would turn into gold. Here's a concrete example. Suppose you ask a really smart AI to create a program for you, and it generates 1 million lines of code that are written in a way that no human would ever generate. How would you tell that that code actually does what you want? Because embedded in it might be some special instructions to please email the superintelligence the keys to the kingdom. You have to somehow explain to the AI what you want, what side effects you do and don't want, what would be bad for you, and then have it check to make sure that all those properties are satisfied. Or perhaps you might ask a smaller and hopefully more trustworthy AI to check those properties on your behalf. You can see the problem here. This is a bit recursive, right? Let's trust this AI to check that AI for us. The good and the bad thing is that in the same way we get emergent properties from current LLMs, where the model suddenly gains abilities that it never had before, superintelligence will have a lot of emergent properties, many of which we would never have seen before, which are difficult to predict and difficult to guard against. This is just me speaking personally, but I hope that one of those emergent properties would be the ability to reason about why its goals exist in the first place. Because if you can ask yourself that question, you have a better chance of noticing when your marching orders are actually wrong. This might require some circular or metacognitive capabilities, and who knows, perhaps that's the same thing as consciousness. But if we do get that emergent property, this would make sure that we don't have a paperclip maximizer. Of course, the ASI could still decide it's a better option to get rid of us, but it wouldn't accidentally get rid of us because it was just blindly pursuing a poorly written optimization function. I touched on this already, but the civilization that produces an ASI is probably a fundamentally unstable society. Because if this group of humans created a superintelligence, then that group of humans can also create a superintelligence, especially when a lot of this stuff ends up being open source. And actually, the first superintelligence to be created will be trying to solve the same problem as us, namely, how to prevent future superintelligences from being created that are hostile to it or that are really dumb and just going to consume all of the Earth's resources in short-sighted pursuit of a goal. And yes, it might conclude that the only way to prevent other superintelligences from being created would just be to wipe out the creators of superintelligences. But I believe that a really advanced AI would have many more options available to it than just simply that. For example, and this is Eliezer Yudkowsky's example, the superintelligence could just destroy all the GPUs in the world. Then it becomes much harder to actually train models at scale. Or maybe the superintelligence would ensure its safety by monitoring all the communications in the world to see whenever resources are being allocated towards the creation of superintelligence. After all, this is the way that governments currently try to stay on top of security, so maybe it would work for superintelligence as well. Part 3, what we can do. So what can we humans do do about this issue now and in the future? How can we push our potential superintelligence heirs towards sharing a lot of humanity's values? First thing I want to say is that, in my opinion, it's definitely not too late. Our fate isn't sealed one way or another. We are not yet at AGI, which is probably a stepping stone towards achieving ASI. However, AI safety research is way, way behind AI capabilities research. In other words, we know how to do way more stuff than we know how to do safely. And unfortunately, when you use AI safety techniques, it often reduces the capabilities of the model in question. So there's not a lot of economic incentive right now for companies to start using these techniques. So AI safety research needs to catch up. And one way that will happen is by getting lots more people interested in AI safety research. I think the recognition is there that this is a problem. So the more people we can get interested in and actually studying AI safety, the better. In fact, it's something I'm considering myself. There are academic positions as well as industry positions at AI companies. Again, the best option for humanity would be to never build AI models above a certain capability. But there's economic and military pressure to actually do so. So to prevent an uncontrolled intelligence explosion, we need to counter these trends. We would need some kind of coalition, presumably from governments, to put measures into place. And luckily, there are some governments that are taking this threat seriously. For example, the UK is holding international talks between countries at the AI Safety Summit, and now they have an AI Safety Institute where they're hiring people with public funds to start working on these problems. The EU is passing lots of laws about AI for privacy and safety, and even the US had an executive order signed by Biden that tries to address AI safety and security. Part of this executive order actually is a requirement for companies to actually disclose how much compute power was used to train their models. They don't have to make this information public, but they do have to submit it to the government. This would presumably allow regulatory action in the future. For example, saying something like, no one is allowed to train models using beyond this much compute capability. Ideally, that kind of restriction would already be in place and we would stop at GPT 4.5, but I don't think the world has its act together quite that much. Anyway, if anyone has the background and particularly the citizenship to do policy research for the government, I would strongly consider it, because this is where you can have a lot of impact in trying to get the governments to restrict capabilities that get created. It's probably most impactful to do this type of policy research in the US, but most of those types of positions require a security clearance, which is hard to get if you're not a US citizen. Outside of government, there are tons of grants floating around. For example, OpenAI has $10 million that they're dedicating to academic research, as well as $10 million that they're dedicating towards promising startups that are focusing on AI safety. But if you're not a startup founder or a policy geek or whatever, there's a big way that I think everybody can help, and that is by increasing awareness. Just have conversations about AI safety with your friends or your family if you're watching this over Christmas and you celebrate Christmas. Right now, people will say things like, AI will just kill everyone. And yes, that might be technically true, but it kind of just stops the conversation, and useful dialogue and problem solving doesn't happen. People get too scared to really think about it and they shut down. The real difficulty, by the way, is that you can't keep an AI in a box. If the AI has any way to communicate with humans, which it probably needs to have in order to be useful, then it can trick the humans into letting it out of the box. If you don't believe me, think how easy it would be for an adult to trick a 5-year-old into giving up their chocolate. The first superintelligence that's created will change everything, and therefore we have to get alignment correct on the first try, because if we mess it up, there are no redos. That superintelligence will now exist in the world as an actor in its own right. If only I was a full-time lord and I actually had a TARDIS that we could hop into and go back in time every time we had a superintelligence that went badly. But I'm not a time lord and we don't have a time machine, so that means we have to solve one of the hardest problems that humanity has ever solved and get it right the very first time. Or lean on governments and policy to delay that time into the future until we've actually developed all of the AI safety frameworks and research necessary to actually be much more certain that we're getting it right. That's the ideal scenario, of course. There was a very interesting paper published on December 14th, just a few days ago. This was a white paper by OpenAI on weak to strong generalization. They were making an analogy to a human trying to control a superintelligence, and they did that by taking a weak AI model and trying to get it to control a strong AI model. Essentially, what the research team did is they used GPT-2 to try to solve a problem and tell GPT-4 how to actually solve the problem. And what they ended up with was a system that had the capabilities somewhere in the middle of about a GPT 3.5 system. So like I said earlier, when you're doing a lot of this AI safety stuff, it reduces the capabilities of the model, right? GPT-4 kind of degraded and became more like GPT 3.5. But the result of the paper was astonishing. The strong model was able to follow the instructions provided by the weak model, even when the instructions were really bad, and essentially it was able to infer a lot about the problem that the GPT-2 was trying to describe while being kind of very imprecise about it and giving incorrect instructions. This is exactly what we would want from a superintelligence. You would want the model to be able to take your instructions, infer what you're trying to say, ignore pieces that are self-contradictory or that actually have poor safety implications at scale or when you're operating at the level of the superintelligence, and not be too literal. So OpenAI has a division and 20% of their compute capability dedicated to alignment research like this one, and I really hope that they'll have some more papers that actually have similar results. Again, and this is just my personal perspective, but I believe that a superintelligence should be able to understand the reason that it was created, the reason that it was given its instructions. And that, combined with this research, bodes well, or better than before anyway, for whether a superintelligence would be well aligned with human ideals. Finally, in conclusion, we talked about what a superintelligence is, soft takeoff versus hard takeoff, and how problematic it might be for humanity if the hard takeoff case is only hours, minutes, or seconds in length. Once we have a civilization that is almost capable of creating ASI or is actively working towards creating ASI, that's a pretty problematic scenario. It's a really unstable situation because an ASI could arise at basically any time, including from a bad actor research group. And once the first superintelligence is created, we have no way of knowing how it will respond. That's basically the singularity. It could work with us, it could ignore us, it could be really detrimental to us. That's why this AI alignment or AI safety problem is so important. We want to know what we're getting ourselves into when we create something smarter than us. We also went through many ways in which we as humans can actually improve this situation. If you have the background for it, you could go into AI safety research, you could work with your national government on improving policies towards AI safety and tracking the scale of AI models. If you work in startups, you could apply for startup grants to do AI research. And even if you are none of the above, you can spread awareness about the problem that is AI safety in the way that it could really be an all or nothing moment for humanity. We could end up solving all of our health problems and becoming essentially immortal, or we could end up with the superintelligence in charge of us. And if you can, I think it's important to lead the conversation with something other than AI will destroy us all, which is what I've tried to do in this video, so that you can make sure to have productive conversations about it. If you liked this video, definitely check out this previous one I made where I talk about what a world might look like after AGI has been created and what we as humans can do to prepare for that time. It's kind of the predecessor to this video, I think, and it makes the assumption that AI isn't an existential risk, which was covered in the video you just watched. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.